The pod was the size of a supply crate and it had no business being in the upper canopy, 40 meters above the water line, wedged between two branches that wouldn't exist in another 6 weeks. I almost logged it as drift debris and moved on. 30 years of salvage assessment had given me that reflex. If it doesn't match the manifest, it goes in the anomaly column and you leave it for the next crawler. I had 17 days until retirement. I did not need an anomaly. I cut it open anyway. The seal had been hand-welded, from the inside, with tools that looked like they'd been improvised from branch joins and something resinous and black. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. The weld was better than half the work I'd seen from certified crews. Inside, packed in a nest of dried moss and bark strips that smelled faintly of something sweet and ancient, lay a child. She was small. Smaller than small. She could have fit in my equipment pack with room for my lunch. 6-limbed, the extra arms folded tight against her torso the way a sleeping animal folds its legs. Pale grey skin with a texture like fine-grained wood, dry and cool when I touched the back of my hand to her shoulder. And running beneath the surface, faint, slow, the blue-white pulse of bioluminescent veins tracing patterns from her collarbone to her temples. Her eyes opened when I touched her. Amber, enormous, the pupils vertical slits that contracted in the light of my headlamp. She did not flinch. She looked at me the way something looks at you when it has already calculated every possible threat in the room and decided, provisionally, that you are the least dangerous one. I pulled my hand back. She watched it go. "Okay," I said, to no one in particular. "Okay." My console pinged. I didn't look at it immediately. I was watching the veins in her neck pulse, slow, calm, a rhythm like something breathing underwater. The patterns shifted as I looked. Contracted, expanded, formed a shape along her jaw that repeated 3 times before settling. I looked at the console. Tren Arsak had updated the manifest. The pod, my pod, the anomaly I hadn't logged yet, had been flagged by the canopy scan drones before I opened it. The entry read, Unregistered Biological Unit, Grid Ref Canopy 7 Tier 4, Non-Sapient Classification Pending Assessment, Scheduled for Disposal with Canopy Burn, Authorization TOS 114. Arsak was the Harvek Extraction Corporation's compliance officer. He had a face like a man who had been told, repeatedly, that efficiency was the same as virtue, and had believed it. I had worked under him for 6 months. He had reclassified 3 Myrith ground fern beds as non-essential growth to clear acreage for extraction equipment. He had filed the paperwork himself, correctly, by the book. I closed the manifest update without acknowledging it. The child was watching me work. "I'm going to need your pod," I told her. "I have to log it." "Don't." She had reached out one of her small upper hands toward my console. I moved it gently aside. The vein patterns in her wrist spiked briefly, bright, fast, the blue going almost white, then settled. "Don't touch that." She withdrew the hand. Watched me. I logged the pod as recovered biological container, contents, botanical material, analysis pending, grid ref entry delayed, scanner calibration issue, manual verification required. It was the kind of notation that would take a field supervisor 4 forms to challenge. I had written it 100 times. It bought, in my experience, between 18 and 48 hours. Then I sat down on the crawler storage bench, across from the child, and thought very hard. The Myrith shelf was dying. The water table had been rising for 80 years. Harvek had accelerated the last 20 meters by puncturing 3 subsurface retention layers during deep extraction. The corporation had the permits. Everything was legal. The canopy forests had maybe 3 months before the water line closed over the last of them, and the company's job, my job, officially, was to assess and recover any materials of commercial or scientific value before the burn teams came through. Seeds, biological samples, mineral deposits, salvageable equipment left from earlier survey operations. The burn teams did not differentiate. They were thorough. No one had expected to find anyone still living in the upper tiers. The Myrith had been classified as evacuated. The grounded clans had left 18 months ago, resettled on the northern ridge plateaus by a consortium relief effort. The canopy families had declined evacuation. The corporation's response had been to classify them as non-cooperative and remove them from the logistics plan. What had happened to the canopy families after that was not in any document I had access to. I looked at the child. The pod's hand-welded seal. The nest of bark and moss. Someone had sealed her in and gone. Or tried to follow and couldn't. or was already gone before the sealing was done. How long were you in there? I asked. The veins pulsed. The pattern that ran from her collarbone to her jaw formed again, the same 3-repetition shape I'd seen when I first touched her. I would spend a lot of time, later, thinking about that pattern. About how it formed when she was responding to a direct question. About how 3 repetitions seemed to mean something she was insisting on. About the fact that she had never once made a sound with her mouth, but had not stopped communicating. But that came later. What came next was Arsak. He called at hour 6. I told him the scanner calibration issue was taking longer than expected, and that I'd have a full biological assessment filed by morning. He told me the burn schedule for Canopy 7 was in 4 days and that any unclassified material in that grid needed to be cleared or destroyed before the team moved in. I told him I understood the schedule. He told me non-sapient biological units were not to be transported off-site without corporate authorization. I told him I was aware of the protocol. I was aware of the protocol. The child had eaten 3 of my emergency rations by then, pressed grain blocks that she dismantled methodically, sorting them into piles by some criterion I couldn't identify before eating the piles in a specific order. She had also examined every surface of the crawler she could reach, pressing her fingertips against the walls with the deliberate attention of someone reading. The vein light ran in long, slow waves down her arms when she did this. When she found a seam in the hull plating, a poorly fitted joint from a repair 2 years ago that I'd never gotten around to fixing, the light spiked bright and she sat down in front of it and pressed both palms flat against it and stayed very still for a long time. I let her. I was composing, in my head, what I was going to do. The IWC relay, the Interstellar Welfare Commission signal buoy, was a mandatory installation on any extraction zone with the potential for indigenous contact. Harvek had fought the installation for 3 years and lost. The relay sat in geostationary orbit above the Mira shelf, and it was required by treaty to accept and log any Sapiens classification submission from any field contractor. Once logged, the IWC had 48 hours to respond. During those 48 hours, the subject of the submission was legally protected under provisional sapient status. Harvek couldn't touch her. The relay also had a 6-minute transmission window every 8 hours. The next window opened in 11 hours. Arsak arrived in person at hour 9. He brought 2 of the corporation site security team, both in full environment suits, both with the kind of build that said they were paid to stand behind people like Arsak and be visible. He stepped into my crawler without knocking, which was technically a protocol violation but not one anyone had ever enforced. He looked at the child, who looked back at him with the same flat amber attention she gave everything. "Rusk," he said, "your scanner's working fine. I checked remotely." There was a calibration drift in the organic mass sensor. I logged it. You logged a calibration drift that shows no flag in the remote diagnostics. I logged what I observed. He looked at the child again. She had gone very still. The vein light had dimmed, all of it, every trace, pulled inward until she was just pale grey and quiet and very small. Non-sapient, Arsak said. The drone scan flagged it as non-sapient on 3 parameters. The drone scan was run at altitude with a passive sensor package. The protocol calls for direct assessment when drone results are inconclusive. The results weren't inconclusive. They were negative. "I'm conducting the direct assessment," I said. "It takes the time it takes." He looked at me. I had worked under Tren Arsak for 6 months, and he had never once looked at me with anything other than the mild impatience of a man who regarded field contractors as a logistics variable. He looked at me differently now. Not angry. Arsak didn't have the gear for anger. Calculating. "You have until the morning transmission window," he said. "Then I need a classification filed or I file one myself. Corporate authorization allows me to make the call when a field contractor is non-responsive." He left. The security team filed out behind him. The child watched the door close. Then she looked at me. The vein light came back, slowly, from her core outward, the patterns reforming like something deciding to be visible again. The 3-repetition shape ran up her jaw. Then something new, a longer sequence, 8 or 9 beats, that moved from her left wrist to her collarbone and stopped. I didn't know what it meant. I knew it meant something. I had 6 hours until the IWC transmission window. I spent 5 of them documenting the vein light patterns, the response differentials, how they changed when I spoke versus when she initiated contact, The way the 3-repetition shape appeared consistently in response to direct address. The way she had examined the crawler surfaces as if reading them, and the specific sustained response she had to the improperly sealed hull joint, a structural detail that would have been meaningless to anything that wasn't mapping the crawler's physical integrity with intent. The food sorting behavior, which I had filmed from 2 angles and which showed a consistent categorical logic that I could not explain but could demonstrate was not random. The response differential between the security team's entry and their exit, how the vane light had pulled inward when they entered and returned when they left, tracking threat as distinct from neutral presence. It was not a sapience assessment in any formal sense. I was a salvage contractor, not a xenobiologist. But the IWC's provisional classification standard did not require a xenobiologist. It required a field report documenting behavioral indicators of sapience under the Commission's criteria, submitted by a registered contractor in the affected zone. I was registered. I was in the zone. I had 14 behavioral indicators on camera and 11 pages of written notes. At our 14, I opened the transmission window and sent everything. Name of subject, unknown. Species, Myrith Canopy Clan. Arboreal, nonverbal, bioluminescent communication. Age, small, young, indeterminate. Classification submitted, sapient, provisional, IWC Field Report FZ Rusk 001. Contractor on record, Dale Rusk, Harvek Extraction, Myrith Shelf Zone 7. Then I closed the window and sat back. ARSAC jammed the relay 17 minutes later. I know this because the IWC sent a timestamped acknowledgement at minute 3 and a relay interference notification at minute 20. By then, the submission was already logged. The 48-hour protection window was already running. He came back at our 15 with 4 security personnel and a corporate legal injunction that his lawyers must have started drafting the moment he'd left my crawler the first time. The injunction cited contractor non-compliance, unauthorized submission to a federal body, and failure to meet assigned disposal timelines. It was thorough. It was probably going to cost me every certification I held. The child was asleep against my side. She had pressed herself into the space between my arm and my ribs an hour earlier and stayed there, and I had not moved. Mr. Rusk. ARSAC's voice had found something colder than calculation. Step away from the unit. She's under provisional IWC protection. A protection application that was filed without corporate authorization and which we are contesting. Contest it with the IWC, I said. You have 46 hours and change. Their field investigators move faster than your legal team. I've seen it go both ways. He stared at me for a long time. The child's vein light pulsed slow and steady against my ribs. She hadn't woken. What ARSAC knew, and what I knew, and what we both understood in that silence, was that the IWC moved fast when the press was watching. And the press watched the Myrith Shelf, because the Myrith Shelf was the kind of story that played well. A dying world. A corporation with permits. And now a registered contractor's filed report documenting a child, a small, 6-limbed, bioluminescent child, logged as salvage in a corporate manifest. I had attached the manifest entry to my submission. I had attached the drone scan classification and the burn schedule and TOS 114 and ARSAC's name on every line of it. At our 31, the IWC investigators' shuttle broke atmosphere. Harvek's legal team met them on the landing pad. ARSAC was not there. He was on a corporate call that, from what I heard later through people who knew people, did not go well for him. The burn schedule for Canopy 7 was suspended pending investigation. The burn schedules for Canopy 1 through Canopy 12 were suspended by close of business the same day, when the IWC investigator filed a preliminary report that used the words systemic noncompliance and willful sapient suppression in the same paragraph. The Harvek Extraction Corporation's Myrith Shelf operation was placed under IWC oversight 6 days later. I filed my retirement notice on day 2. The IWC investigator, a small, tired woman named Pritt who had clearly seen worse and was angry about it anyway, asked me, on day 3, what I wanted done with the child. She needs her people, I said. The Northern Plateau relocation sites. Someone from her clan family. That's first. And if we can't find them, I said. I said it the way I'd said the words to ARSAC's security team when they'd come back the second time, and Pritt had the sense to hear it the same way. She nodded and went back to her work. It took 11 days. One of the Canopy Clan women on the Northern Plateau, an older female with the same arboreal build, the same bark grey skin, the same bioluminescent veining, recognized the pattern along the child's jaw the moment she saw the photograph present. She was on a transport within the hour. I don't know what she said to the child when they were reunited, because neither of them said it with their mouths. But I was in the room, and I watched the vein light move between them, fast and intricate and running patterns I had never seen before, covering every surface of the child's skin simultaneously, and then covering the woman's skin in response, and I did not need a xenobiologist to tell me what I was looking at. I signed my final incident report 3 weeks later, sitting in the empty crawler with my bags packed and the Myrith waterline 6 meters higher than it had been when I arrived. I wrote it the way I wrote all my reports, plain, factual, in the order things happened. I described what I found in the pod. I described the behavioral indicators. I described what RSAC had filed and what I had filed and what had come after. The last line took me a while. I've been writing incident reports for 30 years and I have never had trouble with last lines. But I sat with this one for longer than I expected. I wrote, she was listed as salvage. She wasn't. That's the whole of it. Then I closed the file, picked up my bag, and walked out into what was left of the Myrith morning.